Welcome, and thank you for your interest in Atheopaganism. To talk about what Atheopaganism is, we have to step back for a moment and ask, what is a religion? What is their purpose? Where did they come from? Because Atheopaganism is a particular answer to a set of human needs that we've had since before we were even human. So, what is a religion? Where did they come from? Well, they came from people. We invented our religions to serve important purposes for us. We see evidence of ritual behavior from even pre-human ancestors, so it's clear that ritualism has been a part of us for a very long time. A religion is made up of three basic elements: a cosmology, or a description of reality, a value set, which is about what's considered important and what's considered moral, and then a set of practices, behaviors, or observances. Any religion you can name has those three elements in it. Originally, religion sought to answer big questions about the nature of the universe and humanity's role in it and about how we should behave. They provided evolutionary advantages to those societies which had religions, such as cohesion of the group loyalty and identity, and transfer of technology, values, and knowledge across generations. To individuals in the group, religion served the needs of various parts of the brain. Religious belief and behavior has a soothing and reassuring quality for each of the brain's three main systems that have a nexus with consciousness. Very briefly, this is a complex topic, but very briefly to go into this, the brain's consciousness-related elements fall into three main systems, each of which evolved in order. So the earliest part, which some people call the fish brain or the lizard brain, is related solely to survival and reproduction. That's all that it's about. When the lizard brain is triggered or active or in control of our behavior, we are fighting or fleeing or seeking to mate or seeking to eat. Very, very simple, very simple, very primitive kinds of responses. The next layer of our brain structure that evolved after that is what's called the mammalian or the limbic brain. And that has to do with social behavior, has to do with emotion. The reason that we generally have pets that are mammals is because mammals have that social behavior built into them. They are interactive. They want to connect with others of even other species, not just themselves. Finally, in humans alone, we believe right now, there is the neocortical section of the brain, or the thinking part of the brain. That is the part that we tend to think of most often when we think of consciousness. That's the part that involves reason, the accumulation of knowledge, and concepts of meaning, and understanding of how to behave in particular situations. So those are the three main buckets that brain function falls into for purposes of consciousness. So religion has a soothing and reassuring effect for each of those aspects. In the case of the lizard brain, it tells you you're going to be okay. Maybe you're going to live after death. Maybe you're going to be safe because you're in this group of people who make it less likely that you'll be targeted for predation. To the mammalian brain, it says you belong, you're loved, you're connected. You are appreciated by others and you belong as a part of a larger group. And to the thinking brain, it says, okay, I understand my place in the universe. I understand what the purpose of life is. I know how I'm supposed to live as a human being. And I understand the nature of the universe in my cosmology, whether that's a cosmology that has gods and heaven and hell and all that kind of stuff in it, or whether it's a science-based cosmology that is strictly materialistic and understands that the entire universe is made of matter and energy and follows physical laws. So that's how it used to work for religion. But starting in the Renaissance and accelerating over time, science has proved a much more effective and reliable way of finding out what is true about the universe than religious dogma. Where once it was believed that gods were the cause and the driver of every phenomenon, now there are only a handful of phenomena left. And those are very esoteric. They're things that humans will never experience in their day-to-day life, like dark matter, that cannot be explained by science at this time. So the cosmological part of what had been religious territory, the description of reality, has become less and less the realm of religion and more that of science. The problem is that traditions die hard. People who have been inculcated to believe, capital B, will tend to keep doing it even when what they believe can be proved factually false. And this tension has grown increasingly powerful over the past 500 years. Religion has not ceded ground willingly either. From the early days when Galileo was threatened with torture if he didn't retract his observations of the motions of the moons of Jupiter, one attempt on the part of theists to defend their cosmology has been an argument that longevity is related to validity. In other words, that just because something has been believed for a long time, it must have some kind of validity to it. But this is fallacious. Old claims are not necessarily any better than new claims. The claim that ancient ways are ancient wisdom is simply a falsehood. We don't do this with technology or with medicine. You don't go to the doctor and say, please bleed me because my humors are out of alignment. You go and you get modern medical care. Our ideas are often supplanted by new, more accurate ideas. The short version of this is ancient wisdom usually isn't. So let's imagine, what if we were inventing a religion today? What would our baseline understandings be? What would our cosmology and our value set and our practices be? Well, to start with, if we were inventing a religion today, we would have the cosmology that's described by science. There is no reason to believe that if we were founding a religion today, we would assume that there exist beings and phenomena for which there exists no scientific evidence. However, the way that we think about religions tends to frame things in a way that makes that uncomfortable for people. People tend to assume that you have to have a supernatural component in order to be a religion. But that's only because the Abrahamic religions that dominate our society happen to expect people to believe in supernatural beings and phenomena. Modern paganism has fallen into this hole. It has assumed that in order to be religious, you have to have a faith component in order to truly be a religion. In the context of a fallacious assumption that all religions must believe in such things, this is patently false. A religion requires no supernatural or otherworldly elements, just a cosmology, a set of values, and a set of practices. It is an Abrahamic holdover into neo-paganism that people assume that religion must involve the supernatural. So we've talked about cosmology. We take the cosmology of the universe as science describes it to us. Wow, that's an amazing universe. It's filled with all kinds of extraordinary, beautiful, magnificent, complex things. Next, values. We would not embrace the value set of some ancient culture or time. We wouldn't do that. We would enshrine, if we were creating a religion today, as an ultimate modern humanitarian and environmental value set for our religion. No human sacrifice, no stoning of infidels, no racism or sexism or homophobia or transphobia. And we would understand, because we look at the world through the lens of science, that the earth is where we came from and what sustains us. Therefore, the earth is sacred. We would know that a key core value for our religion is love and stewardship towards the sacred earth. Finally, we would have practices. We would have practices which would be connected to actual real-world events, to the cycles of the Earth's seasons. Our rituals would be informed by images and symbols from history and metaphorical teaching stories like myths. But our holidays would be natural events such as solstices and equinoxes and special occasions like eclipses. Our rituals would serve to help us grow as people, to become kinder and more loving, to connect us in community, and would give us a sense of place in the vastness of this universe. They would be individually custom-created practices so that they worked for every individual practicing them, and they would bring us joy and wisdom. In short, they would be pagan practices. What I have just described, friends, is Atheopaganism. A new, 10 years old this year, 2019, pagan path of heart, values, and meaningful practices rooted in the reality that science describes for us. Atheopaganism is about describing and creating a forward-looking path of pagan practice, not encumbered by superstition, irrational faith, moral values that do not square with modern ideas of equality and liberty, or rituals which may stray far from what appears to be meaningful in today's world. It's about being sensible, being wise, being kind, and being happy. So what is it? What specifically is Atheopaganism? Well, first we begin with its cosmology. Atheopaganism embraces the description of the world articulated by the current state of science. We are skeptical of claims, particularly extraordinary claims like the existence of gods or spooky at a distance magic or reincarnation, for which there is scant or non-existent scientific evidence. But we are always open to the possibility that new evidence will come along to change what science tells us about the world. So we are atheists, but we are 99.9% convinced atheists. That extra 0.1% is always available in case the distant possibility that some god shows up in broad daylight and gets videoed performing miracles happens to occur. It's possible, but we're not holding our breath. Next come Atheopagan values. Atheopaganism is a particular atheistic pagan path. There are others: humanistic paganism, naturalistic paganism, Pagayanism. Ours is a particular path, and it has a particular set of values and principles. First of all, we have four sacred pillars, the four sacred things, and they are truth, love, beauty, and life. Life meaning particularly the biosphere or earth. Those are the four sacred things that we can consider to be always worthy of upholding. It is always worthy to speak the truth. It is always worthy to support love. It is always worthy to advocate on behalf of beauty. And it is always worthy to speak and act on behalf of the sacred earth, the biosphere, life. Beyond those four sacred pillars, we also have 13 principles, which are guidelines for how to live our life. Pagan ethics tends to kind of fall short in this area a lot. For many pagans, like Wiccans, for example, you have the Wiccan Rede, which is, if it doesn't harm anybody, then do as you will. That's very weak tea in a world that's as messed up as ours is. We really need principles that advocate for us to be proactively positive in our interactions in the world, that tell us that it's our responsibility to future generations and to our sacred earth and to ourselves to be forces for good in the world. So we have 13 pagan principles, and I'll read them for you now. Atheopagan Principle 1, skepticism. I recognize that the metaphorical is not the literal. We all love stories. Humans are storytelling creatures. But stories aren't the same thing as reality. We all love The Lord of the Rings, but we should know that elves and dwarves and Balrogs don't really exist in the world. Principle 2, reverence. I honor the earth which produced and sustains humanity. Number 3, gratitude. I am grateful for my life and its gifts. Number 4, humility. I am humble because I am not any better than anybody else. 5, perspective. I laugh a lot, including at myself. 6, praxis. I enact regular ritual in observance of my religion. 7, inclusiveness. I celebrate diversity and am respectful of difference. 8, legacy. I recognize and embrace my responsibility to the young and to future generations. 9, responsibility. I acknowledge that freedom is tempered by responsibility. This is an important one, and I think the pagan community misses out on this one a lot. We're very, very amped about our liberty and our freedom and nobody telling us what to do. We are also responsible for the outcomes of those actions, and we're responsible to the society we live in and to the world on which we live. Principle 10, pleasure positive. I celebrate pleasure as inherently good so long as others are not harmed in its pursuit and the four pillars are respected. Life is good. Life is filled with joys and pleasures, and we should enjoy them. As long as we're not taking advantage of someone else or causing some harm somewhere, we should definitely be enjoying the fruits of this magnificent earth. Principle 11, curiosity. I understand that knowledge is never complete. There's always more to be learned, so I am curious about my world. I'm always working to learn more. Principle 12, integrity. I conduct myself with integrity in word and deed. Basic human thing you got to do. Principle 13, the final and arguably the most important, kindness and compassion. I practice kindness and compassion with others and with myself, recognizing that they and I will not always meet the standards met by these principles. We're all trying, we're all doing our best to be the best people we can. Let's cut one another and ourselves some slack. So those are the Atheopagan values and principles, and that brings us to practices. Atheopaganism has recognizably pagan practices, such as building altars, which we call focuses, so that it's clear that they're not for worshiping or for sacrificing, that they're there as a focal point for a given ritual. Conducting rituals, which affect us psychologically and can help us to reprogram our brains and heal old wounds and focus on intentions that we have for our lives going forward. Ritual is a very, very powerful set of psychological tools. And of course, we celebrate the holidays of the wheel of the year around the solstices and equinoxes and the points in between. Different Atheopagans celebrate the wheel of the year differently because we are encouraged to adapt our Sabbath celebrations to fit with the climate of the actual places where we live. So if you live in the tropics, you're not going to do Brigid with throwing seeds out on the snow. You live in a very different climate setup, and so you're going to celebrate your holidays as having different meanings than someone who lives in Northern Europe, for example. So here's my wheel of the year. Begins with Yule, the midwinter celebration of community, family, and survival through the dark and cold. It's the festival of lights returning. At the beginning of February is River Rain, which is the festival of water, because where I live in Northern California, this is the time when it's raining constantly, and all the creeks have filled up, and the rivers are running full, and the ocean has great big waves. So it's the time of water, and we celebrate all the things that are associated with that. High Spring is the spring equinox. It's the festival of childhood and new growth, new ideas, new initiatives. May Day, which is the festival of adulthood, sexuality, and adult responsibility. Midsummer, which is the summer solstice. The festival of enjoyment, relaxation, and ease. Summer's End at the beginning of August, which is the festival of work, technology, and effort. Harvest, which is the autumnal equinox. The festival of the agricultural harvest, the Grape Crush, where I live in Sonoma County, California, and celebrating what has been achieved over the course of the past cycle. And finally, Hallows, which is at the beginning of November, Halloween-ish time, the festival of death, darkness, endings, and the beginnings of winter. Note that I've used no Celtic names here, and that is because Atheopaganism does not draw traditions from centuries-old cultures. We are creating new culture, drawing forward some old folk practices like maypoles and Yule trees, but not locked into old stories about what Sabbaths mean or any association they might have with goddesses or gods. Now, I don't, But some Atheopagans do use the names and images of goddesses and gods in their practices. They don't believe in them as real persons. They think of them as archetypes and metaphors. And this has been true of many pagans in the pagan community since the 1960s, when the Great Pagan Revival began. There have always been members of the pagan community who have not believed in literal gods. Many of those folks are now coming home to Atheopaganism, stating explicitly what they've always believed inwardly. The Atheopagan path has a symbol that was developed and selected by the community, and it's called the sun tree. You'll probably see some folks wearing it at festivals like Pantheacon or Paganicon. This is what it looks like. That is the sun tree. It's symbolic for us because the sun has 8 rays that represent the 8 Sabbaths around the course of the year. And when combined with the 5 branches of the sun, that 8 plus 5 equals 13, which is the number of the Atheopagan principles. Atheopaganism is religion where you don't have to check your reason at the door. We have a thriving and mutually supportive online community spread around the world, and we're growing steadily as word spreads. And that isn't a surprise when you look in context at what's happening to religion around the world. Belief in gods is dying in the developed world, and fast. If not for proselytizing by Abrahamic missionaries, it would be dying out worldwide. A generation from now, if we are to believe what demographic data tells us about Generation Z, the pagan community will either be much smaller, or it will have embraced the idea of paganism without gods, because Generation Z doesn't believe in gods. Their affinity towards theistic religion is very, very low, per the Pew Research Center's annual polling about religious opinions. As a sidebar, I should point out, the idea of atheistic paganism is not new. It existed in ancient Greece and Rome, and it has existed from the beginning of the modern pagan resurgence. Large numbers of our pagan peers think of gods as archetypes and metaphors, as ideas, rather than as literal persons. Those people are called soft theists, which is completely consistent with being an Atheopagan. Unless you believe in actual, disembodied, self-aware, invisible persons with supernatural powers, you're a non-theist too. I think religion has something valuable to offer. If it's based in sound values and scientific reality. It helps us to celebrate the magnificent beauty of the sacred earth and cosmos, to heal from our wounds and develop wisdom, to build communities of love and kindness, and to mobilize activism on behalf of our sacred earth and of equality and justice. And all of these are deeply needed at this time. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, I invite you to check out Atheopaganism. We're at atheopaganism.org. And we also have a Facebook group, which you can search for Atheopaganism and find that there. We're also on YouTube and on Goodreads and on Twitter. So if that interests you, please do check us out. We welcome new folks. We're always happy to talk with people about what they believe and to be supportive of their developing paths. And if not, then that's cool. We'll see you around the circle anyway. We've been in the community for decades, and we will continue to be. So best wishes to everyone, whatever your orientation is as you watch this video, and blessed be.